So if you've been watching the markets, you've probably seen the soybean complex just light up. I mean, soybean oil futures surged and they pulled the whole market up to a 2-month high. But what in the world is behind this sudden, and let's be honest, kind of confusing rally? We've got a whole mix of things going on. Policy rumors, huge questions about the harvest, and of course, the ever-present China factor. So today, we're going to piece these clues together and solve this soybean puzzle.
You know, this rally wasn't kicked off by just one single thing. It was more like a flurry of news and a whole lot of speculation that sent traders scrambling. So let's really unpack the signals that mattered and try to separate them from all the noise.
And the stakes here are pretty high. We're talking about soybean oil futures jumping by nearly 5% in a single day. A move that big, well, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It was a huge signal that something was shifting under the surface, and it sent ripples across the entire grains market.
Okay, so our first clue, it doesn't start in a field. It actually starts in Washington, D.C. It's all about biofuel policy and how it gets blended into the fuel we put in our cars.
Right. So the key term you got to know here is small refinery exemptions, or SREs for short. Think of these as waivers, basically a get-out-of-jail-free card that lets smaller oil refineries skip the legal requirement to blend biofuels into their gasoline. They argue that having to do it would cause them serious financial trouble.
And this really is the core conflict, right? On one side, you've got farm groups who are all for these mandates because, well, it creates more demand for their crops. But on the other side, the oil industry is arguing that these rules just drive up their costs. It's a classic DC tug-of-war.
So the market was totally buzzing, waiting for the EPA's decision on a huge backlog of these exemption requests. And the final ruling? Well, it was a total mixed bag. Some exemptions were granted, others were denied, and a whole bunch got only partial approval. There was no clear winner, which left the market trying to figure out a very, very murky outcome.
Okay, clue number 2. This one takes us overseas to the single biggest player in the whole global soybean market, China. For months, everyone in the trade has been completely fixated on one question. Will they or won't they start buying U.S. soybeans again?
Here's the deal. Even though China is the world's biggest soybean importer by a long shot, they have not bought a single bushel of new crop soybeans from the U.S. this year. And that absence has been hanging over the market like a huge, dark cloud, really keeping a lid on prices.
But, and this is a big but, a new way of thinking is starting to bubble up. This quote from an analyst really captures it. With export sales to other places looking pretty strong, think unknown destinations in Mexico, some folks are starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the U.S. export program is getting diverse enough that China's absence isn't the total deal breaker it used to be. And this chart just lays it all out, plain as day. Look at that drop-off in new crop sales to China. It is sharp. A couple of years back, they had almost 10 million metric tons booked by this time of year. This year, 0. Zip. It's a really stark visual of how much that trade relationship has changed.
All right, for our third clue, let's talk supply. We're going to head out to the fields where the annual Pro Farmer Crop Tour was sending back some really conflicting signals.
So, on one hand, the potential for this year's soybean crop looked absolutely massive. I mean, the scouts on the tour were calculating the highest soybean pod counts on record in key states like Iowa and Minnesota. This is the factory, you know, the raw potential for a truly enormous bumper harvest.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? At the same time they were seeing all that potential, those same scouts found some really worrying signs of trouble. This quote from one of the tour leaders hits it hard. They saw widespread fungal diseases, plus some really dry conditions in the eastern corn belt that threatened to just steal that potential right out of the fields.
And this table here, it just neatly sums up all that uncertainty. You can see ProFarmer's final yield estimate, which is based on what they actually saw in the fields. Well, it came in below the USDA's official forecast. That suggests the government's outlook might be a little too rosy, and that adds another layer of bullishness, of uncertainty to the supply picture.
So what happens when you throw all these clues together? You've got demand hopes from biofuels, supply fears from the harvest, and this shifting trade picture with China. They don't point to one simple answer. Instead, they create this intense tug-of-war right in the middle of the market.
Let's break it down. On the bullish side, the stuff pushing prices up. You've got that biofuel optimism and some very real worries that crop disease and dry weather are going to hurt the final yield. But on the bearish side, pulling prices down, you have China still sitting on the sidelines and the simple fact that, hey, those record pod counts could still produce a massive crop.
And this is why we're seeing all this volatility. The recent price surge, the day-to-day choppiness, it's a direct result of this tug-of-war. For some traders, it creates this wait-and-see paralysis. For others, they're paying a premium just to manage their risk. It basically means the market is ready to jump on any headline that gives one side an advantage, even for a moment.
So, where do we go from here? There are 3 critical things you've got to watch. First, the USDA's next big crop report in September. That's going to be huge. Second, the weather. The next few weeks are completely make or break for finishing this soybean crop. And third, of course, any signal, any little hint of a change in buying from China.
And really, it all boils down to this final thought. The soybean market is a perfect example of just how interconnected everything is in global commodities. It's this complex dance between government policy, Mother Nature, and international trade. The only question now is, which one of these powerful forces is going to make the next big move?